Calumet Editions, an eclectic publisher of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, introduced a new business model nearly a decade ago, in which the publisher and author work as equal partners in a joint venture. Their stable of authors have won numerous and prestigious prizes across literary forms. Where traditional publishers fail to see the value in projects, Calumet cooperates with its authors in realizing a book's potential.
Welcome to Writer's Corner. We are here once again with a new guest and a repeat guest. And Jeffrey Burton is well known to anybody who loves dogs. He doggedly pursues writing, let's put it that way. And Andrea Gilats, who's a Ph.D. She's also a writer, educator, former yoga teacher, and she has written a book, which you see displayed here, called Radical Endurance, Growing Old in an Age of Longevity. And it's a book that I think everybody who joins AARP should be given a copy of, because it's just a wonderful read as a memoir, and we haven't had many memoir writers on, but a wonderful read for the aging process. And of course, I'm at the other end of the aging process, so I found it really a wealth of knowledge. Now, Jeffrey, you came out with The Second Grave, but you have written several series of books.
I have, yeah. I Google myself and I go, I did that? That was me? Yeah.
Do you get bored after 3 books and move on to a new character?
You know, it's kind of funny, Alan. First off, thanks for having us here. But each of the series, I never started out wanting to write a series. They were kind of standalones. And when I'm talking with my agent and a publisher, and they say, well, do you have some other ideas? It's probably not too bright to say no. So I'm like, sure, I'll get right on that, yes.
Because you've had like 4 or 5, well, this is, I guess, the 3rd series.
Yeah, this is the third series.
And dogs really are very much a part of your novels.
Absolutely. I think I've kind of maybe cornered the market on human remains detection dogs, which are kind of more commonly known as cadaver dogs. And when they find a body, there's always a little bit of mystery, and I try to have them periodically trip over something that, will open a Pandora's box of murder and mayhem and have some twists and turns and some thrills along the way.
Every time I read one of your books, I learn something like a cadaver dog can smell a body that's maybe 30 feet underground.
Yeah,
and,
it's dogs are supernatural. I mean, they have 300 million scent receptors in their nasal cavity, and we only have 5 million. So, if I'm at the movie theater, I'm, popcorn, burning leaves. I was a cook in a restaurant once where the milk went bad and it looked like cottage cheese. I'll never forget that smell.
Yeah.
But when I get up over 10 or 11, 12 things that I can actually detect, then I'm done. But dogs have, thousands and thousands.
Oh my
and
gosh.
That's why they're able to train them in so many different areas. I mean, they can smell out, certain dogs can smell out types of cancer. I know years ago when COVID, they were trying to train them to sniff out some COVID. And then in my case, human remains and bomb sniffing dogs and even money, and of course, different kinds of drugs.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I'm not.
Andrea, how did you get into the memoir writing? This is not your first memoir.
No, it's not. And this is actually my third book because, as you mentioned earlier in the introduction, I taught yoga specifically to older people. And I did that for 8 years, and as an older person myself. And but when I was 50, after I lost my husband to cancer when he was 52 and I had just turned 53, and I suffered with that loss. We did not have children, and perhaps because of that, we were especially close. So we were a very close couple.
That was an interesting story in and of itself, because he was the reason you tried to commit suicide.
Yes, exactly. We had
when you were 20.
Yes. I met him when I was 20 years old. We fell in love, and then he wrote me a Dear Jane letter and said, well, he couldn't continue our relationship because he felt obligated to his high school sweetheart. 13 years later, he called me. And at the time, I was still single because I had fallen in love with art. And I've been an artist all my life. I think I was born, and in fact, when I was just even a little baby, I, not to sound too scatological here, but I even painted murals on the bedroom wall by my crib with the poop that was in my pants, my little diaper. So I was a
good medium.
Yeah, so you can imagine having a child like me.
So you became widowed
when I was in my early 50s.
Right.
And the grief I suffered from that significant loss was not normal grief. It was what is now called prolonged grief disorder, but at the time, that label was not in use yet.
Right, yeah.
It was called complicated grief.
But it spurred you to write your first memoir.
Yes.
And now we have this one,
Yes.
which is Radical Endurance, Growing Old in a Age of Longevity. And it came out last year, right?
Yes, it did, in November. And Alan, what you were saying before, one of the things that I think is helpful for people to know, and thank you for what you said about the book, is that it was written by an old person. So a lot of books about aging, if you look at their authors, with great intentions, and they're good people, and many are experts,
50s and
but
maybe
they're not
60s.
right. But they're not old. So I wanted to combine what I had learned in my work at the University of Minnesota, working with older learners, especially people who were close to or well into retirement, and what was that like? What was a holistic way of looking at life after one's primary career? So I tried to combine what I had learned through that work with my own experience of entering old age and kind of going from being what I think of as an older person to an old person. There's a transition there, and I hope that the book might help people to ease
I've
that.
moved on to become an ancient person. But
I don't think so, Alan.
Well, Andy, could I just ask, did you take up yoga to deal with the grief, or was that earlier?
Yes, partly.
Or?
Thank you, Jeff, for bringing that up. That's right. After I lost my husband, probably for years, friends had been telling me, you should try yoga. It will help you heal. And 7 years after my husband died, I sold our house and moved into a small condominium. And in my condominium building, under the same roof but next door, a yoga studio, a gym opened, and this gym decided to offer yoga classes. So I started doing yoga when I was 62 or 63.
That just mirrors my mom.
And
Yeah.
had a wonderful teacher, and that allowed me to feel good about what I could do.
And ultimately, you became a teacher.
Yeah, and when I was 65, I was winding down from my university work, and I decided to train to be a yoga teacher. I only worked with older people. My youngest student was 45, a woman that had just been diagnosed with Parkinson's. My oldest student, get this, was 98. And she had better balance than I did.
You've got,
Now, you started with the dogs in this series. Actually, you had dogs in earlier books also.
correct.
What inspired you to pick dogs as your almost main characters?
You know, I've heard about human remains detection dogs, and if somebody goes wandering off, you know, maybe the sheriffs will bring in the cadaver dogs to look if a amount of time has gone by. And I got to thinking, you know, in books and maybe in movies, they come in and they're in it for maybe a minute or a page or two just to help the sheriff find something. But what if they are the protagonists? What if
Yes.
You've got a little bit of an offbeat dog handler, and you've got some pretty bright dogs, and Alice is a bloodhound, Rex is a Springer Spaniel, and crazy thing is, with a bloodhound, not only have they got the nose, but you know how a bloodhound's face is just wrinkled,
Yes.
big old floppy ears? That helps sweep up and maintain the scent that they're tracking. So possibly
sure.
they get maybe a little bit of a leg up on some of the other.
So Jeff, did you do research to learn all this? How did you come to know so much?
You know, I'm a research geek, and I have a couple of friends now that are dog trainers that I can pick their brain. One trains dogs for drugs, and then the other one trains dogs for soldiers that are coming back that have post-traumatic stress syndrome. And at some of the events that I've been at, she's showing up and she'll bring her dog along, and it takes her 2 years, you know, so, and the dog can't be trained when they're, you know, a puppy. So usually she's able to get a dog ready to hand off to a soldier, and probably the dog is about 3.
Okay.
But it's amazing, and dog handlers, I mean, they have such patience, and my wife will tell you that I don't, you know, and so you've got to have incredible patience when you're working and training.
Well, the
Oh my
second
gosh.
grave is very interesting, in particular because we have Andrea here talking about aging, because it opens with a prologue in which an older man who doesn't want to cause pain to his family wanders off into the woods to die. And he does. But that leads into the dogs and finding his body. And not only did you find his body, but the dogs found 3 other graves.
Right. It's,
Oh my gosh.
It's kind of bit of a head fake to get them out in. It's Kankakee River State Park, which is like an hour or so south of Chicago. And they show up the next day to search for this elderly gentleman that had wandered off. And they find a couple of graves. And as they begin to identify the people that are inside the grave, they come to realize that 30 years ago, there'd been an epic bank robbery in downtown Chicago where a security guard was killed, and then they disappeared. They just disappeared. It was like infamous, kind of like D.B. Cooper, if you remember
Yes.
Yeah.
him from the 70s. And it's always been a mystery. And then they realized, well, it may be a mystery because a good chunk of the bank crew didn't make it beyond a day or 2 after the robbery. And then there's some people that are still alive from the robbery that...
A good part of the book was trying to discover who these bodies were and how they were connected. And you do that. And then we find a separate grave,
Right.
separate from these 3.
From those, yeah.
And
It's a bit of a mystery on how one of the graves has 3 bodies in it, and then a grave that's, I don't know, 40, 50 yards away just has 1 body in it, and which is the title, the second grave. The person in that grave is a little bit of a past that you kind of come to realize.
Who, as you are a mystery writer and you've written thrillers as well, but who planted these bodies here, and who remains, and is this person connected to the robbery? And of course, that's the story, and you really wrap it up and tie it up and have a surprise ending, basically.
Yeah, I try to. I know from being a bookworm my whole life, if somebody's able to rip the rug out from under me, I'll read the rest of their books forever. I mean, that feeling where all of a sudden you're just stunned. So I try to incorporate, maybe a big surprise, maybe 2 big surprises, and then just the chapter by chapter twists and turns that occur.
Now, Andrea, on the other hand, incorporates a lot of statements from famous people, writers, etc., which really make a very cohesive contribution to the book. At least I found it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
That,
I hope so, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful point, Alan. I think I worked, as I said before, at the University of Minnesota as an educator, creating and directing lifelong learning programs. And that in that way, I think I became an educator. And so to help people learn something or a process of discovery as they read just seems to come naturally to me. So that kind of educational component, I think it's important. One of the beauties of reading is that we can learn so much. Even just what you were saying, Jeff, about in your novels, you're incorporating these dogs who have these special attributes. So that idea of, even in the greatest novel, the most suspenseful novel, that we can still learn some stuff, to me is an important thing.
and it really works its way well into your really memoir.
Yes, thank you for saying that. It comes naturally, I think. But I also think, and I don't know how you two feel about this, I've always felt like, I know all 3 of us are big readers, and I feel like everything I read feeds everything I write, in a way.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I would even say, by the way, I'm a U of M graduate, so maybe we bumped into each other. I'm the one that cut you off at the U of M, in the traffic. But yeah, I would actually say that I've probably, you like to think the author, I'll read predominantly fiction, but when they're writing something that's historical, that they've done their homework, you hope.
Yes.
And so I feel like I've probably learned more from reading fiction that might be in a certain time or a certain area. And you kind of can glean a lot.
See, the difference is I try to find a social issue and create a novel around it. I mean, Holding Court, my first one, was about the kidnapping of a Supreme Court justice, I should say. And his absence, as a matter of fact, just yesterday, one of the Supreme Court justices recused herself from a case. So that case remains with the decision of the Court of Appeals because there's no way to substitute a Supreme Court justice. And they needed his vote on a water shortage problem involving the Colorado River. And the mystery takes off from there. And my latest book is really about an entirely different social problem, which is book banning. And
Wow.
I create fiction over very recognizable circumstances. But the research is tremendous and very involved in these. And obviously, the research in yours is very involved. Now, obviously, you had to search about these dogs and their habits and rely on your friend.
And I mean, I'm a research geek, and even stuff that isn't going to appear in the book. I mean, if I have a character of a certain age, of maybe a certain class or whatever, and I have to have him driving somewhere, I'm on dealership sites trying to, now what would he drive? You know, I think I could crank books out quicker
exactly.
if I didn't
Yes.
get so lost. And then it is kind of funny. I got some feedback a year ago on one of my previous books where a little piece of it took place in a suburb of Chicago, and someone was rich, and I gave them a certain amount of acreage that they owned on their house. And you know, I love getting some reader feedback, and a person sent an email to my site, and they're like, Jeff, I enjoyed the book. However, no one has that many acres in that particular area. And then they had, I guess some fella 10 or 15 years ago had 12 acres, and he wound up chopping that up, and I think I'd given the person like 40 acres. Guess they owned half the suburb. You know?
Accuracy is so important.
Yeah,
in your
that's such a
books.
great point.
My middle one involved foreigners buying up land in the Dakotas.
Oh.
And why are they buying up land in the Dakotas? And as a matter of fact, since then, Congress has stopped most of that. But, you know, why were they? So it necessitated a trip to the Dakotas to familiarize myself with these places, and an Indian reservation, and Native American involvement. And I learned a lot in the research required to come up with this book.
And where did you go in South Dakota or in the
North
Dakota?
Dakota.
North Dakota.
Went to several places in North Dakota, ultimately a reservation and a spot that's now a national site.
And where was that?
Good question. I don't remember.
Okay.
Well, Andy, do you, I bet with your books and being of such a personal nature, I bet you get probably some good feedback from some people that have read them. And
With this book, Radical Endurance, Jeff, as I've been going around doing events, and I love that part of being an author. I don't know how you guys